Has inflation peaked? Well, the CPI data is in and it shows a decrease from 9.1% down to 8.5%, which is leading many people to say, yes, 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 inflation has indeed peaked. But I want to dive deeper with you. What caused this inflation mess? Just how bad is the inflation mess? And how lucky you might actually be, depending on what country you live in. How do we really know if inflation has actually topped and how to invest during times of high inflation? All of that and more in today's video. My name is Lark. I make videos on the topic of investing. If you do enjoy that, like stay up to date with it, make sure to subscribe to the channel. And of course, if you do like that kind of content, leave a little thumbs up on this video, especially if you think that inflation has indeed peaked. Okay, let's go ahead and get into this topic. What causes inflation? Let's start at the beginning. Why does the cost of goods and services go up over time? Meaning, of course, we end up getting less for our money. Well, simply put, it happens when there is too much money chasing too few goods and services, and when there is too much government spending combined along with too much money being created. That is a situation in which you're likely to get inflation running hot, as we have seen. That's the short answer anyway. The longer answer is that different factors cause inflation, including demand pull inflation. Now, this is a situation where demand for goods and services is much greater than the supply of those goods and services. We're seeing this exact thing happening right now with the energy crisis that's come about as a result of the war in Ukraine. Demand is outpacing supply, causing upward pressure on prices. Now, another factor, cost push inflation. Now, this is when the cost of wages and raw materials increases due to the higher cost of production. Now, this is why central banks will always discourage you from asking for a pay increase. They know that this too will help push inflation higher. It's a vicious and never-ending cycle. The third thing is an increase of the money supply. More money in the system chasing the same number of goods means that your purchasing power will end up decreasing over time. And of course, we cannot forget about government policies. Tax subsidies, for example, can increase demand. Strict regulations on a particular industry, such as the construction industry, can end up reducing supply of housing stock, as an example. But either way, all this government intervention can cause an inflationary environment. Basically, what we've seen for the last 2 years is the perfect storm of all this stuff happening. Government stimulus, supply chain issues, war pushing up commodity prices, all leading to a cost of living crisis affecting those with no assets the most, and basically an everything bubble playing out as investors desperately try to escape inflation, pushing up asset prices. And look, it's not just a USA, America issue, although we talk about America mostly because it is the biggest economy. But inflation is ravaging all over the world. Many countries are suffering from it. Inflation is, in fact, breaking records, the kind you wish you could unsee, the bad kind of records. Record highs for the Eurozone, 8.9%, with the Baltic states all over 20%. Ouch. 48 record highs in the USA, 9.1% peak. 9.4% in the UK. Both have inflation targets of 2%, and they're way beyond that. And look, inflation may be cooling in the USA, but the UK is even forecasted to peak out at 13% this year, which is crazy. Australia, 6.1%. New Zealand, 7.3%. Everybody is feeling it. In fact, New Zealand's inflation, New Zealand, 30-year high. Crazy. But that's nothing compared to inflation levels in some of the developing nations. Two countries notorious for hyperinflation recently. Turkey, 79.6%, Argentina, 64%. Now, it's very common for developing nations to suffer from high inflation to the point of hyperinflation. Now, this is due to a lot of reasons. We can blame corruption, supply shocks, bad economic and monetary policy we've seen like Zimbabwe and Venezuela, for example, all of which leads to low wages, import issues, food supply problems, and yes, of course, massive currency devaluation. The inflation plague, it's happening everywhere. But how are we going to know just when inflation is topping? Well, already we see key supply side factors fueling today's inflation have actually begun to turn around, meaning that we could now start to see inflation ease into the future. And to be clear, 8.5% inflation, yay, but that's still crazy high, man. But maybe we can answer the yes to the million-dollar question, which of course has inflation peaked. I want to look at a few factors here with you that might indicate the direction we're heading in. Semiconductor prices. They are now down 14% from the middle of 2021. Now, semiconductors are super important because they act as a forecast for the cost of electronic products, such as basically everything you use, from laptops to LED light bulbs. All those things moving around the world, all the electronics needs semiconductors. Now, what about shipping container rates? Now, these are also now sitting at rates 26 below the all-time high prices from September 2021. Shipping container costs give us a pretty good insight into the expenses that we can expect later on, because all those shipping prices get passed into your food and all those goods that you buy. What about fertilizer prices? Well, in the USA, they're now down 24% from record highs back in March of this year. Common in the production of many foods, fertilizer prices, of course, give us a very strong indication of where global food prices could be going. The next major factor, of course, is commodity prices. We're always talking about the prices of the major commodities, and in general, we're starting to see these actually falling down. Corn, soy, lumber, oil, many of these things have likely peaked in price, which means that inflation will be falling right along behind that. And finally, inflation expectations from Treasury inflation protected securities, TIPS, and TIPS break-even charts. Now, the TIPS break-even uses the yields on TIPS to basically estimate expected inflation. So since March 2022, the 5-year TIPS break-even has actually fallen 100 basis points, basically suggesting that everyone expects inflation to continue falling. So this is all good indications of the inflation crisis coming to an end. And while we're not out of the woods yet, we might at least be past the worst part. Now, before we talk about how inflation affects your long-term success as an investor and how to invest during times of high inflation, I just wanted to break the flow for a quick moment to let you know about Wealth Mastery. This is my weekly cryptocurrency investor newsletter where my team and I cover NFTs, altcoins, DeFi, airdrops, and much, much more. You can sign up for free using the link down below in the description. Our members love it, and I know you will too, so check it out. Now let's get back into it. So, how does inflation affect your long-term success? Well, it's a pretty damn big deal. Let's not forget that inflation compounds and that your money can either work for you or against you. Even the 2% target of inflation, that's what the central banks all want, 2%, right? That compounded over like 30 years means that you lose 50% of your net worth if you set it all in cash under your bed. And sadly, in our world, there will always be winners, there will always be losers in investing in markets, in money, and the people affected by inflation the most, of course, low-income earners, people living paycheck to paycheck, savers, and those on fixed incomes, such as retirees. Here's the fact. You cannot save yourself to wealth. Instead, you have to invest your way to wealth. That's how it works, that's simple. But not all assets will be enough to save you from inflation, especially when we see such rampant and persistent inflation as we've seen globally. When we start getting into double or even triple digits, that's crushing. So how should you invest in times of high inflation? Well, of course, you have to invest in assets. More specifically, invest in what you consider could actually be a strong inflation hedge, something that you think will be the best at keeping up with inflation and, of course, ideally outperforming inflation. So that's a no to your savings account. It's not going to cut it unless you have a really high yield interest rate savings account, but even then, and yeah, bonds are out too. They're all negative yielding anyway. Who's buying bonds, man? Who's buying bonds? That leads to the 4 main areas where I am putting my money. That's stocks, gold, property, and crypto. So what about stocks? Let's start there. Obviously, you have to be careful on what you're buying. Lots of stocks are down big time, but that doesn't mean they're necessarily always great buys. Some of these are still overvalued. And look, I've largely been buying dividend stocks for stuff like renewable energy companies and telecoms, stocks that pay me money. I throw some money into growth stocks too, mostly stocks pay me money. But what about gold? Well, it is a traditional store of value. but it does have its drawbacks, and it has not had super strong performance if we're being honest about it. It's just a small part of my portfolio. Then there's property. Property is great for capital appreciation. It's great for passive income. Rent those suckers out. Many investors waiting for property prices to fall back down a bit before snapping up some real bargains. And of course, we have Bitcoin. I treat Bitcoin like my savings account. Just keep stacking up those sats, throwing some dirty trash in, cash trash into Bitcoin. And of course, we always like to ape into altcoins, flip those to buy more Bitcoin, get more cash to buy more stocks, more gold, more property, rinse and repeat, continue to protect your wealth. Anyway, all this is just my 2 Satoshis. Your question for today: how are you investing during this period of high inflation? What are you putting your money into? Are you doing just crypto, just Bitcoin? You throw money into property as well? You throw money into stocks? You going for bonds, man? Are you crazy? Are you crazy going for bonds? Let us all know down below in the comment section. Thanks so much for watching today's video, and peace out till next time.